The day my father-in-law decided to humiliate me in front of everyone was the day I realized the true nature of my family, and it was nothing like what I had imagined. I'd spent years building a life that I was proud of, carving out a space in the Navy, rising through the ranks, and keeping my head down when it came to family drama. It wasn't easy. Being the only one in the family pursuing a military career made me an outsider, but I had grown used to the subtle digs, the passive-aggressive comments, and the occasional eye roll. I would always brush them off, thinking that this was just part of the price you paid when you were different. But deep down, I was exhausted. And I never expected the person closest to me, my father-in-law, to be the one to break me. Before everything fell apart, life had seemed pretty perfect on the surface. I had married into a family that appeared to have it all: the perfect house, a successful business, and a life that looked like it had been lifted from a picture book. My wife, Anna, was everything I'd ever wanted: intelligent, kind, and beautiful. We were planning our future together, and for the most part, things were smooth. At least, that's what I thought. I'd been a Navy officer for several years before meeting Anna, and I knew what it took to succeed: discipline, commitment, and an unwavering sense of duty. My days were long, my sacrifices many, but I took pride in serving. Anna was proud of me, too. She never questioned my dedication, my work ethic, or my passion for what I did. It felt good being respected, being someone who made a difference. But there was always something in the air when it came to family gatherings. A tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't overt, but it was there. Every time we gathered, it felt like there was this unspoken distance between me and the rest of the family. Sure, they smiled, they clapped me on the back, but there was always a certain look in their eyes, like they were tolerating my presence rather than genuinely welcoming it. Anna's father, George, was at the center of it all. He was the patriarch of the family, the man everyone looked up to. He'd built his fortune from the ground up, and his business acumen was legendary. But his personality? Well, that was something else entirely. George had a way of making you feel small without even trying. He didn't need to raise his voice or make overtly harsh comments. No, George was far more subtle. It was in the way he spoke to you, the way he looked at you when you spoke, the way he'd turn his attention away as if what you were saying didn't matter. He had perfected the art of making you feel insignificant. I'd felt it from the first time I met him. We were at a family dinner, and I could feel his eyes on me, sizing me up. I had been warned by Anna about how protective he could be, but nothing could have prepared me for the sharpness of his gaze. He asked me a lot of questions that evening, and I answered them as best as I could. But I could tell from the way he questioned me that I wasn't measuring up to whatever standard he had in his mind. "You know, in this family, we value hard work," he had said, his tone casual but heavy with meaning. "We don't take shortcuts." I remember feeling a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't so much the words he said, but the way he said them. It was like he was testing me, seeing if I was worthy of being part of the family. I knew, in that moment, I was. From then on, every interaction with George was like walking through a minefield. At first, I tried to ignore the tension, assuming it was just the nerves that come with meeting a new father-in-law. But the longer I spent in their home, the more I realized this wasn't about nerves. It was about power. George was used to being in control, and I was just another cog in his machine. Over time, Anna's family became the center of our social world. We spent every holiday with them, every family event revolved around their house. On the surface, it seemed like I was the one who didn't fit in. I would show up, play the part of the supportive husband, and try to keep a low profile. But no matter how hard I tried, George's influence was always present, a shadow that loomed over every conversation, every decision. The cracks in our relationship began to show more clearly as time went on. The first time it really hit me was when I had just returned from a deployment. I was exhausted, physically drained from months at sea. All I wanted was to relax, spend time with my wife, and reconnect. Anna was excited, too. She'd been supportive throughout my absence, and we were looking forward to some much-needed quality time. But the moment we stepped into her parents' house, everything changed. There was a grand dinner planned that evening. George had arranged everything, of course. The whole family was there, and I was expected to take center stage, as usual. But what I didn't know was that George had been telling everyone I was too busy to really be part of the family, that I was always working, and never there when needed. It was like he was trying to create a narrative where I was the absentee son-in-law, the one who never cared enough to truly be involved. The dinner was uncomfortable from the start. George made several pointed remarks about my absence during family events, my lack of availability, and how the Navy was a great excuse, but family should come first. Anna tried to defend me, but every time she did, George would brush it off as if her opinion didn't matter. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I could feel myself shrinking under George's criticism. By the end of the night, I was emotionally drained. My relationship with Anna was fine, but the strain of being in a house where I wasn't welcome was taking its toll on me. I started to dread family gatherings. Every time we went over to their house, it was like walking into a lion's den. George didn't have to say anything directly to me. His words and actions were calculated, designed to make me feel like I didn't belong. The subtle remarks, the dismissive gestures, the way he would ignore me completely when I spoke, it was all starting to add up. The worst part, Anna never saw it. She had grown up in this family dynamic, and in her eyes, everything was fine. George was just being George, and I needed to not take it so personally. She couldn't understand why I was growing resentful. She didn't see the way her father's words were chipping away at my sense of self-worth. It wasn't that I wanted her to choose between me and her family, it was just that I wanted her to see what was happening. I wanted her to know how much it hurt. But it wasn't until the day of my Navy promotion ceremony that everything finally came to a head. The ceremony was supposed to be the culmination of years of hard work, the moment I'd been waiting for. It wasn't just about the promotion, it was a recognition of my dedication, my sacrifices, and my commitment to serving. It was my moment to stand tall, to be proud of who I had become. But George was determined to make sure that didn't happen. I received a call from him just hours before the ceremony. He had some concerns about my readiness, about whether I was really the right fit for the position. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just about a promotion, it was about him trying to bring me down one last time. He was about to destroy everything I had worked for. The phone call that came just hours before my Navy promotion ceremony changed everything. George, my father-in-law, was on the other end of the line, and his voice was as smooth and calculating as ever. "You know, I've been thinking about your promotion," he started, the casual tone he used making my blood run cold. "I just don't think you're ready for the responsibility that comes with it. It's a big step, and you haven't really shown you can balance it with your personal life. A man's first duty is to his family." I felt the anger flare up in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I knew this wasn't about the Navy, and it wasn't about my personal life. This was another one of his calculated moves, another attempt to undermine me. I'd been through enough of these subtle attacks over the years to recognize his tactics. He was trying to destabilize me before the ceremony, trying to make me question my worth and my place in the family. I wanted to hang up, but I knew I couldn't. I had worked my whole career for this moment, and I wasn't going to let him take it away from me without a fight. But at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why was he so hell-bent on tearing me down? What had I done to earn this kind of animosity from him? I had always tried to be the good son-in-law, the kind of man who showed up on time for family dinners, who smiled through every comment, no matter how patronizing or dismissive. I had never once raised my voice to George. I had always done my best to prove myself worthy of his respect, and yet, no matter how hard I tried, nothing was ever enough. I had been married to Anna for 5 years, and throughout those years, I had watched the way George treated everyone around him, especially me. He was the kind of man who demanded respect but gave none in return. He had a certain way of looking at people, a way of sizing them up, always evaluating their worth based on his own standards. And I was always found wanting in his eyes. I could see it in the way he looked at me when I spoke, in the way he downplayed my achievements, and in the way he pitted me against his other children. The whole family was used to it, but I was the one who felt the sting of it the most. Anna never seemed to notice. She didn't see the subtle jabs George would throw my way during family dinners, the way he would criticize my job, my choices, and even my personality in a way that made me feel small. She didn't understand the toll it was taking on me. She was so wrapped up in the idea of family loyalty that she couldn't see how George's actions were driving a wedge between us. I had tried to talk to her about it. I had tried to explain how I felt, how much it hurt to be constantly belittled by her father. But she would always brush it off, saying things like, "That's just how he is," or "He doesn't mean it." It was as though she couldn't understand the emotional weight of what was happening. It wasn't just the words he said, but the years of subtle manipulation, the constant need to prove myself worthy of his approval. But I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. I wasn't going to let George's influence ruin my moment. This promotion wasn't just a career milestone, it was my chance to prove to myself that I could overcome every obstacle, every criticism, and every challenge that had been thrown my way. It was my moment to stand up and show everyone, including George, that I was capable of achieving greatness on my own terms. I spent the next few hours in a haze trying to focus on preparing for the ceremony. But every time I tried to concentrate, my mind would wander back to the phone call. The words George had said kept echoing in my head. "You're not ready. You haven't shown you can balance it with your personal life. A man's first duty is to his family." It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. It was about my worth, my ability to stand up to the constant criticism, and my desire to finally gain George's respect. But I knew deep down that I would never get it. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I achieved, it would never be enough for him. And then it hit me, the realization that I didn't need his respect. I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. For so long, I had been living in the shadow of George's disapproval, letting his words and actions dictate my self-worth. But now, standing on the cusp of something I had worked so hard for, I realized that I didn't have to let him control me anymore. This was my moment. And no one, not even him, could take it away from me. But as I steeled myself for the ceremony, I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. George wouldn't let this go. He would find a way to sabotage it, to tear me down in front of everyone. He had done it before, and he would do it again if I didn't stop him. I tried to focus on the ceremony, on the people who supported me, on the pride I felt in the work I had done. But there was a voice in the back of my mind, a voice that kept warning me, this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the battle I had been avoiding for so long. Later that evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my uniform, trying to gather my thoughts. The ceremony was only an hour away, and everything I had worked for was finally within reach. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Anna. "Dad just called me. He's not coming tonight. He says he has some concerns about your promotion." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Of course. George had already started his attack. He had found a way to derail everything I had worked for, and now, he was going to do it in the most public way possible. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about standing up for everything I believed in, everything I had worked so hard for. I couldn't let George's insecurities and manipulations destroy my career, my confidence, or my future. I had to face him. I had to confront the man who had been a silent, toxic presence in my life for so long. The question now was how I was going to do it. How could I stand up to the man who had spent years tearing me down, the man who had made me feel like I was never good enough? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let him win. Not tonight, not ever again. The ceremony was a blur. The excitement I had felt earlier, the pride that had swelled in my chest when I first learned about the promotion, had been replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. I had spent years preparing for this moment, thinking it would be a celebration, a triumph. But all I could think about was George, the shadow of his influence hanging over me, threatening to ruin everything I had worked for. The room was filled with people, colleagues, Navy personnel, and a few close friends who had come to support me. But as I stood there, dressed in my uniform, the applause felt distant, muffled, as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at something far below. My mind wasn't on the ceremony. It wasn't on the achievement, or the speeches, or the congratulations. My thoughts kept racing back to the phone call earlier that day, the subtle threat in George's words. He wasn't coming, he said, but that didn't mean he wasn't involved. It was a tactic, an attempt to make me question my worth, to destabilize me just before the most important moment of my career. I tried to push it aside, to focus on the moment. I was finally being recognized for everything I had sacrificed, everything I had given to the Navy. I had earned this, no one could take that from me. But every time I looked out at the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I scanned the room, searching for Anna's face, hoping to find some reassurance, but I didn't see her. She had told me she'd be here, but she was nowhere to be found. The ceremony went on, but I felt disconnected, like I was watching it from afar. I shook hands with the commanding officer, nodded along to the speeches, and smiled when I was introduced, but it all felt hollow. It wasn't real. The words of praise bounced off me like water off a duck, back. I was waiting for the inevitable. I could feel it in my bones, the moment when George would make his presence known, when everything would come crashing down. And then it happened. Just as I was stepping down from the stage, a familiar voice broke through the crowd. My heart stopped. I knew it before I even turned around. George had arrived, and he wasn't here to congratulate me. "Congratulations, son," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. He was standing at the back of the hall, his arms crossed over his chest, a cold, calculating smile on his face. The crowd parted as he made his way toward me, and I could feel the tension building, the air growing thicker with each step he took. Anna was behind him, looking uncomfortable, her face flushed with embarrassment. She was trying to smile, but I could tell it was forced. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be in the middle of whatever George was about to do. George stopped in front of me, extending his hand. I shook it, trying to keep my composure. "You did well," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "But you know, you've always had a way of getting things done." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on us, the quiet whispers from the crowd as they watched the interaction unfold. I couldn't let it show, couldn't let them see how much his presence was affecting me, but inside I was boiling. This wasn't about congratulating me. This wasn't about celebrating my success. This was George's way of asserting his control, of reminding me that no matter what I achieved, I would always be beneath him in his eyes. "You've made a lot of sacrifices to get here," George continued, his tone shifting to something darker. "But let's not forget that a man's loyalty should always lie with his family first. It's not just about your career, son. It's about knowing where your priorities lie." The words stung, but I knew better than to let them show. I had heard this line before, many times. It was always the same with him, family first, as long as it was his definition of family, as long as it was his way. I could feel the anger rising inside me, threatening to boil over. But I had worked too hard for this moment. I wasn't going to let him take it from me. Not now, not after everything I had endured. But before I could respond, the crowd was growing more uncomfortable. Anna stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Dad, not here," she said, her voice tight. "Not now." George didn't even look at her. "It's fine, Anna," he said, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. "I'm just telling your husband what he needs to hear. Maybe he'll finally listen." I could feel the blood rush to my face, the humiliation burning deep inside me. It wasn't just that he was trying to ruin my moment. It wasn't just that he was undermining me in front of everyone. It was that he was doing it with such casual ease, as though this was just another one of his games, another way to make me feel small. And the worst part, he was winning. But something inside me snapped. I had spent so many years holding back, letting him chip away at my confidence, my self-worth. I had tolerated it for so long, thinking that if I just played along, if I just kept my head down, everything would work out. But this was different. This was my moment, my success, and I wasn't going to let him take it away from me. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. I wasn't going to back down, not this time. "George," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I've had enough of your games." He raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by my sudden change in tone. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his smile faltering slightly. "I'm talking about the way you've treated me all these years," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "The way you've undermined me at every turn, the way you've tried to control every aspect of my life. I'm done with it. I'm done letting you dictate my worth, my career, my future. I've earned this promotion, and no matter how hard you try to tear me down, you can't take that away from me." The room fell silent. No one moved, no one breathed. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. George was staring at me, his expression unreadable. I could see the shock in his eyes, the realization that I wasn't the same man I had been when I first met him. I wasn't the timid, eager-to-please son-in-law anymore. I had changed, and he wasn't prepared for it. Anna was standing next to me now, her face a mixture of disbelief and guilt. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the pain of being caught in the middle of this confrontation. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "Don't," I said softly. "This is something I need to do, for me." George's smile returned, but it was no longer warm. It was cold, calculating, like a predator cornered. "You really think you can stand up to me?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can take me on and win?" I met his gaze, my eyes steady. "I already have," I said, "and I'll keep winning, because I'm not the man you think I am." For a moment, I thought he might lash out, might make some final attempt to tear me down. But instead, he just stood there, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. It was as if he was trying to decide whether to say something more, to retaliate in some way. But he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the room, my heart pounding, my body shaking. The room was still silent, but I could feel the shift in the air. Something had changed. I had changed. I looked at Anna, who was now standing beside me, her face pale and eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "I need some air," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'll be outside." As I walked toward the door, I could hear the murmurs behind me, the whispers of everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care what they thought. I had stood up for myself. I had taken control of my own life. And no matter what happened next, I knew that nothing could ever take that away from me. The cold air outside hit me like a shockwave as I stepped into the night. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed space, distance from the chaos, from the looks and whispers that would undoubtedly follow the confrontation. I walked aimlessly around the block, my thoughts swirling in a dizzying whirlwind. What had just happened? I had faced down George in front of everyone, spoken the truth that had been buried inside me for years, and in that moment, I felt a sense of liberation. But the weight of what I'd done didn't fully hit me until I found myself alone. The truth was, I had never been the kind of man who stood up for himself. Oh, I could fight battles at work, win promotions, endure long deployments, but when it came to my personal life, I had always been the one to take a backseat. I had let George dictate the pace, let his criticisms slide under the radar while I swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. But tonight was different. I had refused to be silent. I had finally said what needed to be said. But at what cost? Was it worth it? Was it worth the damage it had done to my relationship with Anna, to the family dynamic I had been trying to hold together? I ran my hand over my face, feeling the tension that had been building for years now pulling at my muscles. This was a long time coming. George had been the source of so much pain, so much doubt in my life. The years of subtle jabs, the criticisms, the feeling of never being good enough. He had always been there, watching from the sidelines, controlling the narrative with every word. But now, for the first time, I had taken control. I couldn't just walk away from it now. The weight of the confrontation still lingered, a constant knot in my stomach. What did it all mean? Was I done with my father-in-law forever, or was this just the beginning of something much worse? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, staring at it for a moment before I sent Anna a quick message. "I need to talk. Please don't follow me right now. Just give me some space." As soon as I hit send, I regretted it. Maybe I should have called. Maybe I should have tried harder to explain myself before she saw me walk out, alone, into the night. But no, I needed this. I needed to be alone to process everything, to make sense of the emotional whirlwind that had just hit. I walked further down the street, the cool wind cutting through my jacket. The city was quiet at this hour, most of the streets deserted, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. It felt almost surreal. I could still hear George's voice echoing in my head. "You think you can stand up to me? You think you can take me on and win?" It was a challenge, an invitation to continue the fight. And yet, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight anymore. As I turned the corner, I saw a small park ahead, its gates slightly ajar. Without thinking, I made my way through the gate and walked along the path, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound in the stillness of the night. It was a familiar walk, one I had taken countless times when I needed to clear my head before everything changed, before I married Anna, before the pressure of family and career had pushed me to my breaking point. The coolness of the night was calming, and as I walked further, I began to feel the weight of my anger start to dissipate, if only a little. I thought about the conversation that had transpired just hours earlier, about how I had finally spoken up to George. For years, I had swallowed his comments, let his superiority fester in the corners of my mind. But now, I had pushed back. I had finally stood up for myself. It had felt good. But then, why did it feel like I had just opened Pandora's box? I sat down on one of the benches, the wood cold beneath me, and stared up at the sky. The stars were barely visible through the city's glow, but there was something about the quiet of the moment that made me feel like I could breathe again. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound by the expectations of others. I wasn't playing a role. I wasn't trying to live up to the impossible standards set by my father-in-law. In that brief moment, it felt like I had taken control of my life again, like I had finally broken free of his influence. But as the silence settled around me, I realized how much I had to lose. Anna, my relationship with her was at the heart of this whole mess. I could feel the conflict in her eyes when I turned away from her during the confrontation. She was torn between loyalty to her father and loyalty to me, and there was no way she could choose without consequences. She had always been so loyal to her family, to George, that I never imagined it would be possible to tear that bond apart. But here I was, in the middle of the storm, holding onto the wreckage of what had just exploded between us. I reached for my phone again, staring at Anna's unread message. I hadn't given her the chance to speak, to explain her feelings, to try to comfort me or justify her father's actions. I had been so focused on my own anger, on my need to be heard, that I hadn't considered what this was doing to her. I had pushed her into the middle of this fight without warning, without thinking about the consequences. Was it too late to take it all back? Had I gone too far? Had I lost her in the process? A part of me knew that there was no going back. I had crossed a line tonight, and I wasn't sure I could walk it back. But there was another part of me that wondered if this would be the catalyst for change, the push that Anna and I needed to break free of George's control. I stood up and began packing, the thoughts racing in my mind faster than I could process them. I couldn't stay out here forever. Eventually, I would have to face Anna. I would have to face George again. And when that moment came, I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know if I would even be able to stand my ground again. The darkness of the night seemed to press in around me, and I pulled my jacket tighter against my body, trying to gather the fragments of my thoughts. I couldn't let this break me. I had worked too hard, fought too long to let George's influence and his toxic grip on my life take everything away. But I also knew that standing my ground wasn't going to be enough. I needed to rebuild. I needed to figure out how to navigate the emotional fallout from tonight. And most of all, I needed to figure out what Anna and I were going to be after all of this. My phone buzzed again and my heart skipped a beat. I saw Anna's name on the screen. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing before I opened the message. "Please come back, we need to talk. I know you're upset, but we can't let this tear us apart. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. She was scared, she was hurt, and most importantly, she still loved me. I felt a mixture of guilt and relief wash over me, but it was the relief that won out. She wasn't leaving me, not yet. I hadn't completely destroyed everything. With shaky hands, I typed back, "I'm coming home, we'll talk." And for the first time that night, I didn't feel so alone. When I finally walked back through the door of the house, the weight of everything hit me all over again. The silence was thick, like the air before a storm. Anna was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the floor, her face pale and tired. It was clear she hadn't moved since I left, and I could feel the tension in her every breath. She hadn't even tried to hide the tears that had been building in her eyes. "Hey," I said softly, standing at the threshold. I wasn't sure what to say next. Words felt inadequate in the face of everything that had just happened. Anna didn't look up at first, but after a long moment, she finally raised her eyes to meet mine. "You left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You just walked out. I didn't know what to do." "I know," I replied, walking toward her but keeping some distance. I didn't want to crowd her, not after everything that had gone down. I needed to respect the space between us, even if it felt like an ocean. "I'm sorry. I needed time to think, to figure things out." She wiped at her eyes, but I could see the red rims, the evidence of the tears she hadn't been able to hold back. It hurt, seeing her like this, knowing that I was the cause. I had tried so hard to protect her from all the toxic dynamics in her family, but tonight I had dragged her straight into the center of it. And now it was all falling apart. "You think you can just walk out like that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Without talking to me, without letting me explain." "I wasn't thinking," I said quietly. "I didn't know what else to do. I was angry, Anna, so damn angry, and I didn't want to make things worse by saying something I couldn't take back." She let out a deep sigh, her shoulders slumping in exhaustion. "You think I don't get it, that I don't feel the same way, that I don't hate what my dad has done to you, to us. I've been watching him do this to you for years, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay, but that felt like a lie. I wasn't sure if anything would be okay anymore. I didn't want to hurt you, Anna. But when he showed up at the ceremony, it was like everything came crashing down. All the years of him belittling me, trying to control every part of my life, it was like he was trying to ruin the one thing I've worked so hard for." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I wasn't part of it. You don't have to drag me into this fight with him. I don't want you to think that you're fighting me too, because I'm not on his side." I could hear the pain in her words, the guilt she was carrying. She had been trying so hard to keep the peace, to manage the impossible divide between her loyalty to her family and her love for me. But this wasn't just about loyalty anymore. This was about what we were willing to tolerate, what we were willing to sacrifice for the sake of each other's happiness. I took a step forward and sat down beside her, careful not to invade her space. "I'm not fighting you, Anna. I never was. But I'm tired of fighting your dad's battles. I'm tired of him controlling every part of my life." She nodded, her tears coming faster now, but she didn't turn away. "I know. I've been tired of it too, but I didn't know how to make him stop. I didn't know how to get him to see you, to see us, without him feeling like he needed to tear everything down just to prove that he's still in control." I reached for her hand, holding it gently in mine. "You shouldn't have had to carry that burden. It was unfair of me to keep you in the middle of it for so long. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong. I didn't want you to feel torn between me and your family, but now we can't avoid it anymore." Anna sniffled and wiped at her eyes. "We can't, you're right. This has been building for so long. And now I don't know how we move forward. I don't know how we go back to being just us when everything has been so broken." I didn't have an answer for her. I wanted to promise her that we could fix everything, that we could repair the damage, but I didn't know if that was possible. The damage felt so deep, so ingrained, that I wasn't sure where to start. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't do this alone, and if I wanted to fix anything, we had to start by being honest with each other. No more lies, no more pretending. "We'll figure it out," I said, though the words felt heavy. "We have to. We can't keep going like this, pretending everything's fine when it's falling apart." Anna nodded slowly. "But what about your promotion? What about everything you've worked for? I know this is a huge deal for you, and I feel like I've been taking that away from you by not standing up to my dad." I could hear the guilt in her voice, but I didn't want her to carry that either. "You didn't take anything from me, Anna. I've wanted this promotion for years and I've worked hard for it, but it's not just about the Navy. It's about us, about our life together. And if this is going to work, we have to figure out how to make both parts of our lives fit. We can't keep pretending that nothing's wrong just because we don't want to rock the boat." She nodded, looking down at our hands. "I just don't want to lose you. I don't want us to be broken by this. I love you, and I hate that my dad has come between us, but I don't know how to fix it." "I don't want to lose you either," I said, squeezing her hand. "But we can't let this define us. We can't let him control our lives anymore. We need to face this together as a team. If we're going to make it work, we have to be honest with each other. About everything." Anna swallowed hard, nodding again. "Okay, we'll figure it out together." And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about standing up to George. It wasn't just about proving I could handle the pressure of my career. This was about proving to myself that I could handle the pressure of my own life, of my relationships, and the sacrifices that came with them. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. There were still going to be tough conversations, difficult decisions, and painful moments. But I knew one thing now that I hadn't known before: I wasn't going to fight this battle alone. Anna and I were in this together, and that made all the difference. As we sat there, our hands still intertwined, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. And maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild from the wreckage of everything that had been torn apart. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. In the quiet of that moment, I realized that the road ahead was uncertain. But at least we were facing it side by side. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty. Despite the initial conversation with Anna, despite the decision to move forward together, the weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy in the air. We were trying, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something had already broken, and fixing it would take more than just words. It would take time, patience, and most of all, honesty, something that had been lacking in both my relationship with George and, at times, in my marriage. Anna and I didn't have many more conversations about the confrontation with her father, and that, in itself, was a problem. We had avoided the subject, as if pretending it hadn't happened would somehow make it go away. But deep down, we both knew that sweeping things under the rug wasn't going to work this time. We had to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. The most difficult part, though, was the distance it had created between us and the rest of her family. It was impossible to ignore the ripple effect that had come from the night of the ceremony. There was no way we could pretend everything was fine when Anna's family was now divided. I knew that George wasn't going to let this slide. He wasn't the type of man who would quietly accept being confronted. And Anna, she was torn between her loyalty to me and her loyalty to her father. At first, I thought Anna was doing okay. She seemed to be trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, carrying on with her work and our day-to-day routines. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the moments when she would look away or hold her breath, as if trying to avoid facing the truth of what had happened. It was clear she was struggling. She was trying to be everything for everyone, supporting me, yet feeling the sting of her father's betrayal. She had been raised to respect him, to follow his lead. And now, she was caught between two worlds, with neither of them offering the comfort she so desperately needed. One afternoon, about a week after the confrontation, I came home to find Anna sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her, her face a mix of exhaustion and guilt. The sight of her immediately sent a pang of worry through me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual as I set my bag down. "How's your day been?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the table for a few seconds before looking up at me, her eyes glassy. "I spoke to my dad today." My stomach dropped. I had been expecting this. The silence between Anna and her father had become unbearable, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they had to talk. But hearing it from her, hearing the weight in her voice, made the reality of everything hit harder than I had anticipated. "About what?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "About what happened at the ceremony. He's angry, Daniel, he's furious with you, and with me, he says I've betrayed him." I felt a flash of anger rise up in my chest. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make George understand how deeply he had hurt us both. But I kept quiet, letting Anna finish. "He says you've disrespected him in front of the whole family, that you've made him look weak, like he doesn't control his own household." Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "And then he told me he was disappointed in me. He said I should have known better than to marry someone who was so dishonorable." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. George had never been a man to admit fault or take responsibility for his actions. He was always the one in control, always the one who held the power in the family. And now, when he was faced with someone who had finally stood up to him, someone who had dared to defy him, he was reacting the only way he knew how, by digging his heels in deeper, by blaming everyone else for his own shortcomings. "I didn't know what to say," Anna continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my father, and even though I know you're right, even though I know what he's done to you, I don't know how to just cut him out of my life. I don't know how to let go of the person I've always thought he was." I walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer whatever comfort I could. "I understand, Anna, I do. This isn't easy for you, but you don't have to choose between me and him. I'm not asking you to cut him out of your life, but I am asking you to see him for who he really is." Anna looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and fear. "But what if I can't do that? What if I can't choose? What if it means losing you and him? What if I lose both?" I took a deep breath, sitting down beside her. I hadn't realized how much pain she was carrying, how much internal conflict she was experiencing. For so long, I had been so focused on the damage George had caused to me that I hadn't fully understood the toll it was taking on Anna. She had been in the middle of this mess, torn between the man she loved and the family that had raised her. She had always wanted to believe the best in her father, but now that belief was crumbling, piece by piece. "You don't have to choose, Anna," I said softly. "Not between us. Not between him and me. You don't need to protect him anymore. You've done enough of that. And I know it's hard, but the truth is, you can love someone without letting them control your life." She turned her head away, staring at the floor. The silence stretched between us, both of us lost in our thoughts. I could see the battle raging inside her, her loyalty to her father, the love she felt for him despite everything, and the realization that she couldn't continue living in this toxic, manipulative environment. "You're right," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "But it's hard, Daniel, so hard." "I know," I said gently. "It's going to be hard, but we have each other, and we're not going to let him destroy us. Not anymore." We sat there for a long time, the weight of the conversation sinking in. It was the first time we had truly acknowledged the depth of the problem. It was the first time we had truly confronted the way George's influence had been poisoning our relationship, our lives. That night, after a quiet dinner, I went for a run. I needed to clear my head, to focus on something other than the whirlwind of emotions that had been consuming me. As I ran, I thought about Anna's words, about the way she had been torn apart by the situation. I realized then that it wasn't just George who had caused the rift between us, it was all of us. We had all allowed this toxic dynamic to persist, to seep into every corner of our lives. But now, we had to take responsibility for it. We had to decide what kind of future we wanted together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations with Anna's family, more moments of tension and conflict. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. A chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find a way forward that didn't involve George's control. When I got back home, Anna was waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first, but she gave me a small, uncertain smile as I walked through the door. "We'll figure this out, right?" she asked quietly. I nodded, a sense of determination settling in my chest. "Yeah, we will." And in that moment, I realized that the only way forward was together, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. There was no sudden, cathartic moment where everything clicked into place, no singular conversation that fixed it all. Instead, it was a series of small steps, each one a quiet decision to keep going, to keep facing the mess we'd made and the wounds that were still fresh. Anna and I spent more time talking, really talking, than we had in years. It wasn't easy. There were moments of silence, moments of frustration where neither of us knew how to bridge the growing chasm between our families. But there were also moments of connection, of seeing each other for who we truly were beneath the layers of our past, the expectations we had carried for so long. I think, in many ways, that's what this had been about all along, learning to see each other more clearly, without the filters of family loyalty or external pressures clouding our judgment. We decided to seek therapy. At first, Anna had been hesitant, unsure if it was the right step. But I convinced her that we couldn't keep walking in circles, that we needed an outside perspective. I wanted to do whatever it took to heal the damage done by George, to mend the trust that had been frayed between us. I wasn't sure what to expect from therapy, but it felt like a necessary step toward something healthier, something more sustainable than the mess we had been living in. The first few sessions were hard. There were tears. There was tension. It felt like we were walking through a minefield of old wounds and unresolved issues. But with each session, it became clear that this wasn't just about my confrontation with George. It was about everything that had led up to that moment, about the way Anna had been conditioned to put family above all else, about the way I had allowed myself to be dragged along, quietly suffering in silence, hoping that things would get better on their own. It was about the silent compromises we had both made over the years, the things we had sacrificed for the sake of avoiding conflict. In therapy, we talked about the boundaries we needed to set, not just with George, but with everyone. We had spent so much of our lives bending ourselves into shapes that would make others happy, but we hadn't done the same for ourselves. It became clear that if we wanted to move forward, we needed to start prioritizing ourselves, our relationship, our well-being, over the expectations of those around us. It wasn't easy. We didn't have all the answers right away. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like Anna and I were on the same page. We were in this together, navigating the wreckage of our past, figuring out how to build something new from the ground up. One of the hardest things for Anna was confronting her father. The idea of standing up to George, of calling him out on his behavior, was terrifying for her. She loved him, despite everything. And no matter how much he had hurt her, no matter how many times he had betrayed her trust, she couldn't erase the years of conditioning that made her want to protect him. But as we talked more about it, as we explored the ways George had shaped her view of herself and the world, Anna realized that she didn't owe him her loyalty anymore. She didn't owe him the kind of blind obedience that had been expected of her. She had to let go of the idea that her worth was tied to his approval. It took weeks, but she finally mustered the courage to confront him. She called him, and for the first time, I could hear the strength in her voice. I didn't know what was said during that conversation. She didn't share the details with me right away, but I could see the change in her after. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that conversation. She was stronger, clearer, more certain of who she was and what she needed. Anna and George didn't speak for a long time after that. It wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined it would be. There were no loud arguments, no explosive scenes. It was more of a slow withdrawal, a growing distance between them that neither one could bridge. I think Anna knew, deep down, that the relationship she had once cherished with her father was beyond repair. And though that truth was painful, she knew it was necessary for her own healing. The fallout from our confrontation still lingered. Anna didn't speak to her family for a while, and we spent many weekends just the two of us, figuring out what our lives looked like without the constant pressure of their expectations. It was freeing in many ways, but it was also lonely. We both missed the good parts of the family, the moments of laughter, the holidays that had once been filled with warmth. But the more we stepped away from the toxicity, the more we realized that we had to be okay with letting go. The truth was, we had outgrown the roles we had been forced into. And now, it was time to create a new life, one where we could thrive without the shadow of George or anyone else hanging over us. As for me, I had to find a way to reclaim my career, my sense of purpose. After the ceremony, I had been consumed by the emotional fallout of everything that had happened. I had been so focused on surviving the immediate aftermath that I hadn't fully processed the toll it had taken on me. The promotion, which should have been a joyous moment, had been overshadowed by the drama with George and the unraveling of my relationship with Anna. I hadn't given myself the chance to feel proud of what I had accomplished, because I had been so busy trying to hold everything together. But slowly, I began to focus on myself again. I returned to the Navy with a new sense of purpose, not just for the job, but for what it represented, everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, all the battles I had fought and won without anyone else's approval. I realized, finally, that I didn't need to prove anything to George. I didn't need his validation. The Navy wasn't just a career for me, it was a part of who I was, and it was time I embraced that fully. Over time, things settled. Anna and I found a new rhythm in our relationship. We spent time with the friends who had stood by us, those who hadn't been caught up in the drama of our families. We took long walks, went on trips, and slowly we began to rebuild the foundation of our marriage. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the shadows of the past crept in, when I'd catch Anna staring off into the distance, her face clouded with the pain of everything she had lost. But there was also laughter, there was connection, and there was love. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was enough. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, I turned to Anna and said, "Do you think we'll ever be okay with all of this?" She looked at me for a long time, her eyes soft, her expression thoughtful. "I think we already are," she said quietly. "I think we've found a way to move forward. It's just going to take time." And as I looked at her, I knew she was right. We hadn't fixed everything. There were still scars, still pieces of us that were broken, but we had made it through the storm, and that, in itself, was something worth holding onto. It wasn't a perfect resolution, not by any means, but it was our resolution, and it was enough.